Thank you for hearing me today. My name is Edward Joseph Snowden. I'd like to talk about what I see as the tension between the necessity of the act of whistleblowing to the public and the value that it creates, and the law as written, where even the most perfect laws by the most enlightened legislators can never capture all of the variance and complexity of the circumstances that give rise to the act. This is to say roughly that an act of whistleblowing can't be qualified or disqualified by strict compliance with the law during the acts of investigation and revelation. That strict compliance is in many cases impossible, often by design. Institutions and individuals who wield influence and power in society have every incentive to prevent the examination of their activities. It doesn't matter where someone who blows the whistle comes from. It does not matter if they're employed by the organization. It doesn't matter if they're a member of it. It does not matter if they were engaged strictly in the criminal activity or the wrongdoing that they are then later exposing. If that were true, I myself would not be considered a whistleblower because I worked happily with the NSA and CIA for many years. I did not know the implications and impact of all the things in which I was involved. But I knew enough. Eventually, I knew more, and eventually that changed my sense of commitment or the ordering of my obligations between my ordinary happy life, where I kept my silence, went about my work, I thought about advantaging myself, my office, my agency, and the contrast that had to society. My government would argue that revealing their unlawful and immoral activities, violations of laws and rights in the United States and abroad, was itself a crime. And perhaps that is true. But this is to say that an act of whistleblowing has to be judged by whether it advances the public interest. The individual and their circumstances, while material and relevant in some contexts, are not the most important factor. This is because it matters far less to the public and, in my opinion, to the law, how a particular fact was acquired, than if that fact is true and necessary for the public to know in order to secure justice. But you might ask, based on this, all right, how can justice be secured by an act that is itself in violation of the law? My argument would be necessity, an answer that I believe is well recognized by courts and juries in many, many contexts. Consider, for example, the use of force, even a killing. If the use of force was necessary and proportionate to the threat presented, for example, to defend the life of yourself or another against an immediate threat or immediate harm, the question of correctness in law becomes secondary to the question of correctness in consequence. If the breaking of the law results in the termination or prevention of a greater wrongdoing, our attention must focus not to the question of if the law was broken, so much as whether the law in question is just. Now, I can imagine that some courts are uncomfortable with whistleblowing as an exception. But that is the nature of the thing. It is an exceptional act. It is a costly act. In many cases, an act of self-immolation for the one who's blowing the whistle. Certainly, without any judgment in law, I have shouldered more than my share of consequences. And this is to say it is a self-regulating activity. This doesn't mean there can be no regulation at all. This doesn't not mean the law must be silent here, but it does mean that judgment must take a superior role to the mere questioning of the law itself. Whistleblowing to me is, as a result of this, democracy's safeguard of last resort. To put it more plainly, this is not something that is frequently volunteered for, but it is a necessary thing. We all feel a sense, I think, no matter who we are, no matter where we're from, whether we've done this before or not, whether we're a person in the room right now looking at the fire alarm on the wall, we are confronted with a sense of trepidation when we realize that whistleblowing is the glass that must be broken in order to save the building. And if we interpret the law such that only an angel can break the glass, you must be, the perfect citizen, you must be the perfect lawyer, you must have the perfect background, and be correct in all things in order for this to bring you to a better place. We won't be able to save the building. If we want the building to be saved, it must be that everyone and anyone, no matter who they are, no matter how they arrived before that panel, has the greatest incentive to expose to society the danger that they have discovered. This is not to say that we make the lines and laws in society meaningless. And I think it's unreasonable to say that this argument forwards that position. Yes, we want laws and lines to have meaning if they are to be obeyed, but that doesn't mean that we forget that we must, as a primary objective in looking at these controversies, guard ourselves against the mistake that lines that were created in advance of a situation are absolute. They could not have foreseen the circumstances of the day. The day is always changing. And so I would argue that justice in the case of whistleblowing is less the product of the black letters of law than it is the product of judgment. And judgment is the understanding that even the commission of a crime can be an act of public service. The final accounting of any act of whistleblowing is found in its consequences. It is not a question of how we arrived before the case, but rather where it has led us. And this is to say, the direction of our journey has relevance, certainly, should be considered. But ultimately, we judge a social act by its social outcomes. And I believe that in the case of Rui Pinto, there is no question that the stories that have been uncovered here have advanced the public interest, and I hope you will agree. Thank you very much for hearing me.